Hey heroes, and welcome to another Serpentine episode of History of the Marvel Universe. The subject of this video is voted on by Patreon supporters. If you would like to help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we looked at the origins of 3 different versions of the Serpent Squad and the various snake-themed villains therein. The first incarnation was founded by Klaus Voorhees, the Cobra, and included 2 brothers, the Eel and the Viper. The second squad, assembled by the Atlantean warlord Krang on behalf of the elder god Set, also included Cobra and Eel, but a different Viper, the former Madam Hydra, Ophelia Sarkeesian, and the Circus of Crime member, Princess Python. That squad ultimately fell apart, but their schemes resulted in Hugh Jones, at the time the president of the notorious Roxxon Oil Company, also falling under the influence of Set. As such, Jones soon founded his own Serpent Squad, a project that was headed by a Roxxon financial analyst named Seth Volker, who was endowed with teleportation powers and became known as Sidewinder. Volker oversaw the creation of more Serpentine super agents, including his new squad mates Anaconda, Black Mamba, and Death Adder. During this time, Roxxon also provided bionic arms and a snake-like tail to Quincy McIver, who adopted his dead brother's code name Bushmaster. You can refer to my Serpent Squad video for more details on all of that, but in the end, Volker abandoned Roxxon when he saw just how unhinged Hugh Jones was becoming, and Jones himself was ultimately defeated by several heroes, causing the company to cut ties with the Serpent Squad entirely. In the wake of this, Sidewinder deduced that a life of crime could be a lucrative one, but only if done intelligently and with proper planning. As such, he began researching the plethora of snake-themed supervillains that had been active over the years, and began recruiting and organizing them into a new initiative, the Serpent Society. Using his experience as a financial analyst, Sidewinder set up the society to operate somewhat like a business. Any money acquired through group operations would be added to a shared pool, and members would be required to pay in 10% of any profits made from solo exploits. In exchange, each of the Serpents would be granted a guaranteed pay scale, along with performance-based bonuses, medical benefits, pension plans, and improved equipment. Furthermore, Sidewinder promised to use his teleportation abilities to free any society members who wound up getting caught and imprisoned. For this endeavor, he set up 2 headquarters, referred to as Serpent Citadels, with one hidden within a midtown hotel and another built out of an abandoned asylum in upstate New York that was purchased by Sidewinder. The latter of which contained rooms and facilities for all of the society's members, as well as a small staff of servants, groundskeepers, security guards, and medical professionals. There was a secret passage there that could be used to launch flying hover vehicles called Serpent Saucers, of which there were initially 3 constructed. Sidewinder sent out a number of invitations to attend his pitch meeting for this enterprise. Among those we already discussed last time, Anaconda, Black Mamba, Bushmaster, Cobra, Death Adder, and Princess Python all agreed to join. He also reached out to the Madam Hydra Viper, but she outright declined. The other Viper, of course, was already dead by this point. So now, let's discuss some of the new Serpents that Sidewinder recruited. First up, we have an Egyptian woman named Cleo Nefertiti, aka the Asp. Little is known of her early life aside from the fact that she was born in Tanta, a city in northern Egypt. As an adult, she worked as an exotic dancer under the name Temptress in New York's Pink Flamingo Lounge, during which time she built up her muscular control. The source of her superhuman powers is undocumented, but she possesses the ability to project a form of radiant energy from her hands, called venom bolts, which are capable of paralyzing or killing living organisms depending on the intensity of the blast, but are generally ineffective against inorganic or inanimate targets. There is a limit to how much she can use this power before needing to recharge her energy, which she can do by rhythmically moving her torso and arms, drawing on her experience as a dancer to perform a so-called snake dance that is borderline hypnotic with its seductive movements. In addition to all this, the pores of her skin secrete small amounts of the venom, making prolonged physical contact potentially fatal. With these abilities, she took the codename Asp and became a founding member of the Serpent Society. Next, we have Gustav Kruger, aka the Rattler. He's another one whose early history is not well documented. Older handbooks have listed his place of birth as Breslau, East Germany, a city that is now known as Wrocław, and I believe has been part of Poland since 1945. Historians can go ahead and correct me in the comments, but if I'm not mistaken, this means he would have been at least 40 years old at the time of his first appearance in 1985. Putting aside whatever effect the sliding timeline would have had on any of this, before being recruited into the Serpent Society, the Rattler had already been outfitted with an artificial prehensile snake tail that was bionically grafted onto his lower back and spine. Measuring roughly 7 feet long and weighing 55 pounds, the tail itself could easily grasp objects between 8 and 18 inches in diameter. It was also capable of supporting Gustav's full weight plus an additional 300 pounds while hanging from something. The Rattler himself possessed superhuman strength, allowing him to press roughly 1,000 pounds under optimal conditions. The rattle at the tip of his tail was capable of generating sonic vibrations at various levels of intensity. At low levels, this was capable of disorienting anyone within a 25-foot range, whereas higher intensities could generate a unidirectional shockwave with enough power to shatter glass and deflect projectiles. Next we have Burchell Clemens, aka Cottonmouth. Not to be confused with Cornell Cottonmouth Stokes, a New York crime boss who clashed with Luke Cage. Born in Mobile, Alabama, Burchell Clemens was a professional criminal primarily active in the southern United States before his jaw and neck were bionically enhanced and his teeth were replaced with steel fangs. This allowed him to open his mouth wider than the size of a human head and bite down with enough pressure to crush stone and bend any metal softer than iron. I will note here that the circumstances under which Cottonmouth and Rattler gained their bionic enhancements are currently unconfirmed. I would personally posit that one or both of them may have been experimented on by Roxxon under the direction of Hugh Jones and Seth Volker, but that is purely speculation on my part. Interestingly, some sources, both in handbooks and in actual comics, have misidentified Cottonmouth as Quincy McIver. Now, this is actually the legal name of his teammate Bushmaster, who is confirmed to have received his bionic enhancements from Roxxon. There's also an instance of Cottonmouth being referred to by the similar name Quincy McLeaver, but handbooks eventually identified him as Burchell Clemens. Finally, we have Rachel Leighton, aka Diamondback. Much like Cottonmouth, she shares a codename with one of Luke Cage's foes, but the other Diamondback, Willis Stryker, was seemingly dead at the time of the Serpent Society's foundation. Rachel Leighton was born in Austin, Texas, but moved to New York with her family when she was very young and grew up on the Lower East Side. Her father passed away when she was still a child, and so Rachel and her 3 brothers were raised by a single mom who was constantly working to support them. The oldest sibling, William, served in the military, but lost the use of his legs while fighting in Southeast Asia. Rachel grew up spending much of her time with her older brothers and developed a tomboyish personality as she always tried to prove herself to them. As she entered her adolescent years, she grew particularly close to her brother Ricky, who was closest to her in age, and even followed him when he began stealing from candy stores and the like. Eventually, however, the middle brother, Danny Leighton, joined a local gang called the Savage Crims, and Ricky soon followed. The leader of this gang was a sadistic individual named Brock Rumlow, who years later would become the masked mercenary known as Crossbones. Not wanting to be left out, a 15-year-old Rachel followed Danny and Ricky to the Crims' hideout and demanded to join, even striking Rumlow to try and prove how tough she was. However, she was denied entry and Rumlow had Ricky take his sister home. Having some idea just how dangerous Rumlow was, a worried Ricky warned his sister to stay away, but not long after that Rachel skipped school and returned, picking the lock to get inside. She came face to face with the gang leader once again and insisted that she would be willing to do anything to join the Savage Crims. In response, Rumbo promised to let her in if the 15-year-old girl agreed to, and I quote, be his girlfriend for a couple hours. I probably don't need to spell out exactly what happened next, but suffice it to say it wasn't good, as Rachel returned home badly beaten and hid her violation from her family, instead claiming that she'd been mugged by several girls on the way to school. Taking this story at face value, Danny and Ricky returned to the Crims to ask for their help in finding those responsible, and based on their reaction, it didn't take Danny long to get an idea of what really happened. With Danny afraid and unsure of what to do next, Ricky went to their oldest brother, William, and told him what he knew. Despite being reliant on a wheelchair, William quickly had Ricky bring him to the gang hideout and confronted Rumlow at gunpoint. Unfortunately, this standoff ended with William Leighton being fatally stabbed in the chest. Ashamed of himself for not going with them, Danny Leighton left the country and relocated to Europe, where he eventually became an international mercenary under the name Cutthroat. Ricky, meanwhile, left the gang, but did not give up his life of crime, and was shot and killed by the police while robbing a Korean grocery only 3 months later. Ricky Leighton was only 17 years old at the time of his death. Having little respect for the law after that, Rachel eventually dropped out of high school and instead honed her skills as a pickpocket and con artist. Seeking to become a career criminal, she enrolled in Taskmaster's illegal academy in Pennsylvania, where she properly learned to fight. Funnily enough, one of her instructors there was a woman named Blanche Sitsinski, who went on to become a member of Roxxon's Serpent Squad as Anaconda. Unfortunately, another instructor was none other than her abuser, Brock Rumlow, who at the time was using the alias Bingo Brock. This prompted Rachel to alter her appearance by changing her hair and wearing heavy makeup in the hopes that he wouldn't recognize her. In the end, she succeeded in graduating from the academy and created her own costumed identity as Diamondback. Using the connections she'd made, she contacted Peter Petruski, aka the Trapster, and commissioned from him a set of throwing weapons made to resemble diamonds. I will note that she once claimed that her brother Danny had introduced her to Petruski, but this was apparently a lie. As Diamondback, Rachel operated as a mercenary thief before catching Sidewinder's attention and subsequently becoming a founding member of the Serpent Society. Now that's just about it for those who initially joined up, but there was one more person who Sidewinder invited, the Constrictor. Born as Frank Payne in Racine, Wisconsin, the few glimpses we've gotten into the Constrictor's upbringing paint an ugly picture rife with abuse. When he was a child, his mother was in a common-law relationship with a man named Scott McAvey, who ended up murdering Frank's mother and sister, Amy. Frank witnessed this and hid until the police arrived, led by Captain George Stacy. Stacy did his best to comfort Frank while McAvey was arrested. However, the deranged killer threatened the child, warning him to stay silent. In the eventual trial months later, Frank intended on telling the truth about what happened, but in the end McAvey's intimidation worked. Frank testified that he hadn't witnessed anything that night, and McAvey was somehow found not guilty due to lack of evidence. Traumatized by these events, Frank later dropped out of high school as a teenager, but ultimately found work as an agent of the international intelligence agency SHIELD. He also married an unidentified woman and had a daughter named Mia, but his family were unaware of his life as a spy, instead believing that he was an international currency exchange consultant. Under the direction of Nick Fury, Payne was sent to Chicago to infiltrate the criminal organization known as the Corporation, using the false identity of Frank Schlichting. Posing as a hired goon and going deep undercover, Frank embedded himself within the corporation, but then one night while transporting laundered money, Frank and several other agents were set upon by a group of young men from a rival gang. The confrontation erupted into a gunfight and Frank was forced to shoot his way out, killing one of his attackers in the process. This all reawakened his childhood trauma, and Frank met with Fury, begging to be taken off the case. However, Fury prioritized the mission and ordered Frank to maintain his cover, sending him back into the field. Fury thought that he would be able to work out his issues, but 2 days later Frank cut off all contact with S.H.I.E.L.D. and switched sides, becoming a costumed agent for the corporation known as the Constrictor, and fully adopting his Frank Schlichting identity. He was outfitted with a partially bulletproofed suit of body armor built by the weapons contractor Justin Hammer, and served as a special operative and assassin. His battlesuit's primary offensive weapon was a pair of 30-foot-long electrically powered cables that could eject and retract from the top of his costume's wrists. Made from an adamantium alloy, these virtually unbreakable, cybernetically controlled coils could be whipped hard enough to tear through solid steel or constrict around a target with up to 115 psi of force. They were also able to release a high-frequency electrical charge of up to 35,000 volts, and could maintain this voltage for approximately 3 minutes before depleting the costume's power pack. Naturally, the suit also insulated Frank against this electricity, and the cybernetic systems which allowed him to control these functions were protected within the bulletproof section of his cowl. Meanwhile, with Frank having completely abandoned his old life, Fury told his wife and daughter that Frank Payne had died an accidental death at sea. The Constrictor went on to serve the corporation amidst a number of operations, during which he clashed with the likes of Captain America and the Incredible Hulk. However, the corporation suffered a series of defeats, and its various leaders like Eugene Stivak and Curtis Jackson were either killed or arrested during conflicts with Earth's heroes, ultimately leaving the organization defunct. Following this, the Constrictor went freelance and worked for the likes of Justin Hammer, as well as a mobster from Chicago named Salvatore Donato. For a while, he partnered with the murderous mutant Sabretooth, during which time the duo clashed with the Daughters of the Dragon, Colleen Wing and Misty Knight, and later their allies, Power Man and Iron Fist. He was later employed by Viper, the nihilistic former Madam Hydra, and clashed with Captain America and his ally, Jack Monroe. Monroe has a bit of a complicated history himself that we could probably go deeper into another time. In the 1950s, he usurped the costume and name of the missing World War II hero Bucky Barnes and operated alongside an unhinged and unsanctioned Captain America impersonator. But in the midst of these conflicts with Viper and the Constrictor, he adopted an identity that was briefly used by Steve Rogers, Nomad. But anyway, in the end, Constrictor turned against Viper after learning that her schemes involved a genocide against the American people with a biological weapon, and ultimately she was defeated by Captain America and Nomad. It was after all of that when Constrictor was contacted by Sidewinder and invited to become a founding member of the Serpent Society. But among those who showed up to hear Sidewinder's pitch, only Constrictor declined, believing he was better off on his own. With the others agreeing to join, Sidewinder laid out a team-based initiation test to determine if the members were capable of working together while simultaneously acquiring resources for the society. Cobra, Anaconda, and Rattler were sent to a defunct Brand Corporation building on Long Island to retrieve equipment that had been used in the mutagenic research that empowered Roxxon's Serpent Squad. Worried that the Society's activities might cut into his own business, Constrictor followed the three there and left an anonymous tip with the Avengers alerting Captain America to their presence. And in the ensuing battle, Anaconda attacked Cap alone, while Cobra and Rattler absconded with the stolen equipment. Naturally, this led to her defeat, but true to his word, Sidewinder freed Anaconda from jail in a matter of hours, proving the efficacy of working as a team. Furthermore, it didn't take the Society long to figure out that Constrictor was the one who tipped off the authorities, and Anaconda confronted him soon after, badly beating him and leaving him hospitalized. With the test missions having gone successfully, the Serpent Society kicked into high gear and began advertising their services as superhuman mercenaries to other entities, from noted crime lords like the Kingpin and the Magiadons to subversive organizations like AIM, Hydra, and the Secret Empire. Their first actual job on behalf of one such organization came soon after, when AIM hired them to assassinate their deposed leader, MODOK. With their combined resources, the Serpent Society pinpointed the Mad Genius's most likely hiding places, and he was found in an underwater facility off of Jersey Shore by Diamondback and Bushmaster. MODOK did escape from their initial encounter, but the Society stayed on top of him, and he was ultimately slain by Death Adder and Cottonmouth. This operation also caught the attention of Captian America, who noticed Princess Python fleeing the scene. Lacking superpowers of her own, Python didn't want to face MODOK and told Cap that the Serpent Society had been hired to kill him. Cap attempted to intervene, and while he was too late to save MODOK, he did defeat several of the Serpents. Of course, that was all for naught, as Sidewinder continued to free any who were captured by the authorities. Meanwhile, the other Serpents found Princess Python and brought her back to the Serpent Citadel, where Sidewinder interrogated her before using Roxxon's memory-altering machines to wipe any society secrets from her mind. He planned to ransom her off to her old allies in the circus of crime, but while Death Adder was bringing her to the rendezvous point, his Serpent Saucer was shot down by the brutal vigilante known as the Scourge of the Underworld. Princess Python ultimately escaped unharmed, but Death Adder was shot and killed by Scourge. Sidewinder retrieved his body from the morgue and genuinely mourned the loss of his friend and ally. What followed was a massive hunt for Death Adder's killer, although Scourge proved to be too elusive even for the Society to track down. In the midst of this hunt, Diamondback came upon Captian America, who was also investigating Scourge, and suggested that they join forces. She was somewhat smitten with him, but of course Cap didn't exactly trust someone he recognized as a member of the Serpent Society. Although that became a moot point when Diamondback was shot in the arm by a trigger-happy farmer while the two were on his property. She was brought to a hospital to recover and soon snuck away when Cobra came to retrieve her. Scourge did attempt to eliminate them as well, but the two escaped before he could get a clean shot. Captian America continued his own investigation, and while he succeeded in subduing and unmasking one Scourge, the deadly vigilante was immediately shot and killed by another, thus hinting at the grisly truth that the Scourge of the Underworld was not an individual, but an organization. Of course, that's a story for another day. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. As always, let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And of course, if there is anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!